Part 3. Get set up here. Part 3 of Zeke Proctor. We're getting into the goingsnake massacre part. This gets crazy. Buckle up, Buttercup. Here we go. So, because of the emotions of this trial and everything that surrounded it, with Polly Beck, a woman of the Beck family, who were a fairly prominent family in Cherokee Nation, being murdered, the fact that she had family who were working with U.S. deputy marshals, that was bad. The fact that Jim Kesterson had filed a complaint with the federal government and got them involved, even though they weren't supposed to be involved in Cherokee business, was bad. The fact that there were several Cherokee men who swore that Zeke would not hang for this, that they would get him off scot-free, that they're like, we got your back, man. Nothing's gonna happen to you for this. Emotions were running high. So they were going to have the trial at the courthouse. Well, it wasn't as easily defended, so they ended up switching it to the Whitmire Schoolhouse, which it's not standing anymore. They know the general area. That valley has changed, so they know the general area where it happened, but anyway, so they got moved to there. During the trial, it said everyone was armed to the teeth, heavily armed. Meanwhile, the federal government had dispatched a 10-member posse, including 2 U.S. deputy marshals, to secure the arrest of Proctor if he got off with Cherokee Nation. So if Cherokee Nation said, you know what, Mr. Proctor, you're free to go. It was an accident. Just try to watch where you're shooting next time. Then, by golly, the feds from the white man's government were going to be there to scoop him up and try him in a white man's court. So that's how the Cherokees viewed it anyway. So along with that posse, there were 5 members of the Beck family. 5 relatives of Polly rode with that posse. So already, this is not off to a good start, because you can imagine that those Becks were not out for justice. They were out for blood. They were wanting to avenge Polly. They weren't there to make sure Zeke got a fair trial. I would imagine they were riding along to make sure Zeke got, they got revenge on Zeke. So already this is not a good objective posse. This is, and several sources say that the Becks were not supposed to be part of the posse. They kind of tagged along. I don't know. It was fuzzy again, but adding up to be bad. So, let me see what else I wrote down. Without warning, members of the group with the U.S. Deputy Marshal attacked the schoolhouse. That is what Wikipedia says. But as always, I did some digging and I did some research and I found out some different information, which is interesting. So even though Wikipedia says that the group with the U.S. Marshals, the posse that showed up, started shooting at the schoolhouse, I don't know how entirely accurate that is, because I found an old newspaper article, you can find it right here, that was, let's see, the date was April 17th, which would have been about a month after Polly Beck's murder and after Goingsnake massacre and all of that. So it was published in the Fort Smith, Arkansas New Era. I don't know if that's a paper. I guess that's a paper. And it's a whole article, so I'm going to read it to you. But I want you to remember that, just like today, sometimes journalists and the news can always, they're not always objective. So sometimes things will be written to make certain people look better or to make certain people look worse. So I don't know. But I do know that we have a letter from one of the U.S. Marshals, a J.S. Peavy. Can't remember his whole name. It was Joseph G. Peavy. And so we have a letter from him that he wrote right after the massacre happened. So let's see what happened from their standpoint. It says, the feeling of jealousy harbored by our Indian neighbors at the authority of the government of the United States exercised over their territory culminated last Monday. So already they're sort of painting Cherokee Nation to be kind of like rebels against the United States government. And that could be the furthest thing from the truth, because the United States government told the Cherokee Nation that they could take care of their own business. So of course they're going to be mad about it. And of course they're going to have jealousy and hatred towards the government, because the government had done them dirty several times. So again, sometimes newspapers and articles paint certain people a certain way. So we have to look for that when we read. Be objective. All right. In a fearful deed of bloodshed falling little short of wholesale massacre of the agents of the United States government, the following startling letter was received on Tuesday morning at the United States Marshal's office by Captain James W. Donnelly, who was chief clerk. It says, and it come from Whitmire's Baron Fork, Cherokee Nation. Sir, we have had a terrible fight. Loss of 7 on our side killed dead, 3 of theirs, and lots wounded. We are in a devil of a strait. Send us men and means instantly. We are with the dead and wounded and expect to stay with them until the last one of us goes up. Owens is wounded. For God's sake, send help and send quickly. Come to Hatchtown, I think. Some of this stuff didn't translate too right. And then down Barren Fort to Whitmire's. Ward is killed. Somebody, I can't make it out who, and I are alone with Owens. None of the rest are with us. We look for help tomorrow by dark, and lots. We are looking to be attacked at every moment. The parties are close together. Some of the Cherokees are with us. Yours in haste, J.S. Peavy. So, U.S. Deputy Marshal Peavy, after the fight at Whitmire Church, sent in this letter that says they were attacked. Let's see. It just says we have had a terrible fight. So I'm going to read the rest of this article, and it's going to go on to say that the people inside the court attacked the marshals first. But other sources say that the marshals attacked first. So we're going to talk about why there's a difference of opinion on that in just a minute. But let me finish the article here. In order that the circumstances causing the terrible fight above alluded to may be more fully understood, we will state the following. On the 11th, a white man by the name of J.L. Kesterson, living in the Cherokee Nation near the Arkansas line, about 50 miles from this city, came to this city and filed an information before the United States Commissioner Colonel James Churchill against one Ezekiel Proctor, also a white man and married to a Cherokee woman. So here they're calling Ezekiel a white man. He was only half white. His dad was white. So they're kind of laying claim to him being white, possibly as an excuse to get involved. So you see how sticky it got? For assaulting him with intent to kill. He stated while he was in his sawmill on the 18th of February last, the aforesaid Proctor came in, walked up to his wife, a Cherokee woman, and without provocation shot her dead. Now, that's not entirely true. We know for sure that he did not shoot Polly Beck for no reason, and he didn't walk up to her with the intention of shooting her. So, there's some lies being told somewhere. Then pointed his revolver at him and tried, the ball striking him just above the left eye. Before he could fire again, Kesterson escaped. He further stated that the said Proctor was undergoing his trial now for the murder of his wife at the courthouse in Goingsnake District, about 57 miles northwest of this place. A writ was issued, and the deputy marshals were instructed to go to the courthouse and remain until the trial was over, and if he were not convicted, to arrest him on that charge. Proctor was known to be a desperado, and it being in the neighborhood where Deputy Marshal Bentz was killed a little over a month ago, and where, in fact, a deputy marshal is shot almost on sight, it was necessary that a strong posse be sent. The party also had writs for the murders of United States Deputy Marshal Bentz, who were supposed to be in that immediate vicinity, and it was known that they intended to resist arrest. On Saturday morning, April 13th, Deputy Marshals... my water over, you didn't see that. Deputy Marshals Jacob Owens and Joseph Peavy with William Ward, Joseph Vinoy, it lists in Paul Jonas, Eugene Brackett as posse left here for the scene of the action. At Evansville, they were joined by Riley Woods. Now, I have to admit, I kind of looked that name up because I am a Woods. I was a Woods before I got married, and so I tried to find some more information on Riley Woods just because I was thinking he might be family to me. But from what I can tell, he was young. He was like a teenager. And he was one that got killed, which I'm going to tell you all the dead in a minute. So they were joined by Riley Woods and William J. Morris, and at Dutchtown by a man named Beck, who was part Cherokee. And remember, they were joined by more than one Beck, and they were all Cherokee, part of Polly Beck's family. But the newspaper does not report that part. The Indian courthouse is but 12 miles west of that place. The party proceeded, and when about 3 p.m. on Monday they were within 50 yards of the courthouse, they dismounted, hitched their horses, and quietly walked toward the east side of the house in files by twos and stopped at the corner. Beck stepped around to the front door and looked in. Seeing a large number of persons inside, armed to the teeth, he turned immediately to come away, but not before he was fired upon and dangerously wounded in the act of turning, the ball passing in near the left shoulder blade and lodging against the collarbone. At the same instant, a volley was poured from the courthouse upon the marshal's force without, who then commenced to return fire. They were at a great disadvantage, and the attacking party was under shelter inside the courthouse. It appears that Beck, who is a Cherokee, had some friends inside the courthouse who, when they saw him fall, opened fire on Beck's enemies inside. And presently the fighting was general and fierce inside and outside the courthouse. It was brief, however, but terrible in its results. So the newspaper is claiming that Beck had some friends who were in the courthouse on trial with Zeke Proctor, which makes sense because they were there to see if Zeke got, justice for killing Polly. And then supposedly the Beck who was with the U.S. Marshals shows up, and supposedly somebody from inside the courthouse shot Beck, and then other people inside the courthouse were like, hey, what'd you shoot him for? He's our friend, he's our family, whatever. And then they start shooting, and so they're shooting each other in the courthouse, and they're shooting at the marshals, and that's one side of it. But again, we don't know 100% what happened, but that is for sure one side of it. So, of the marshal's force, 7 out of 11 lay dead. Of the assailants, only 3. Some 16 or 17 are reported wounded, some mortally, as Deputy Marshal Owens, who was shot through the body above the hips. The messenger who brought the United States Deputy Marshal Peavy's note to Captain James Donnelly is quite a young man and was one of the marshal's force. So I'm going to skip down to where it says, Proctor, the woman killer and desperado, was guarded by 11 of his personal friends who would not see him convicted. That's what the newspaper says. The sheriff was killed, and the judge received 3 buckshot in the knee. Indeed, it appears from the sudden and deadly assault upon the marshal's force that people inside the courthouse had been fully informed of their approach and were prepared for them. The officials had instructions to make a demand for Proctor in case of his acquittal, and as that would not be brought about except through intimidation or collusion of the jury, they expected some resistance should they attempt to arrest Proctor after his acquittal. But for the murderous volley on their first appearance, they were not prepared, hence their slaughter. Immediately upon receipt of Deputy Marshal Peavy's letter, Chief Deputy Marshal Captain J.W. Donnelly, Chief Clerk, and United States Commissioner Brooks and Churchill raised and mounted a force of 30 men and put them under the command of our gallant City Marshal Robinson, formerly a Deputy United States Marshal, and Joe Tinker, a brave and cool deputy. Cool, not like cool, he was hip, meaning like he had a level head. Cool, he wasn't a hot head, he had a good head on his shoulders. Accompanying the expedition are somebody filled and pierced with all the necessary surgical appliances and relief for the wounded. This is one of the most terrible affairs ever known in this country, originating in the distrust and jealousy with which the more enlightened portion of the inhabitants of the Indian Territory, misled by bad white men who only too often find hiding place in the sparsely settled territory from officers of justice, regard United States officials and them a deadly resentment against their interference. So, how long this ought to last, we don't know, but Congress ought to make an end of it at once. What protection can be had in the territory may be surmised from the fact that a man like Proctor, who is said to have already committed 18 murders when he killed in her own house a woman and nearly killed her husband, both almost total strangers to him, can yet go unhung. So there we see a good old case of biased journalism where they are writing to make Cherokee Nation sound like they cannot handle their business and that the federal government should get involved and put into it. And also it makes Proctor out to be something that he's not. I mean, he was definitely a rowdy character, and he was definitely kind of a desperado, as they called him, but there was a lot more to the story than he just walked in and randomly murdered Polly Beck. The fight had been brewing for a while, but the newspaper back then did not touch on it. It was interesting that they included a note from Captain Peavy after the fight. So if you will tune in for part 4, I'm going to tell you about the Cherokee side of it and why they might have been the first ones to fire on the posse. And I'm going to tell you about the posse side of it and why they might have been the first ones to fire. But still, to this day, we don't know who fired first. We don't know. But that's what the newspaper claimed, that the Cherokees fired first. But obviously that newspaper was very biased, so we can't take that as fact. So tune in tomorrow and we're going to talk about part 4 and also who got killed and how one man escaped. So